We've been in various types of lockdown for a while now, in many places in the world. Are you feeling tired? Sleeping more than usual? Or maybe you just can't get to sleep. That feeling of exhaustion seems to be pretty common right now, a deep bone-numbing fatigue. Or maybe it's showing itself as a frustration as not being able to get motivated. Or maybe it's the lack of physical activity. Maybe you're craving physical touch. Maybe you're overloaded with news and information. Could it be too many Zoom video calls that's wearing you out? Or trying to school your kids at home while trying to work, or parent other non-school aged children too? Maybe it's this feeling of limbo. What happens next? What's the next stage? It's probably some or all of the above, and some other reasons that I've not mentioned too. Staying at home can be stressful, it can be boring, and people are also worried about their finances. All this is perfectly understandable, and be assured you're not alone. Lockdown fatigue is real. Movement data from many places around the world is showing that people are moving around more, even though government advice has not changed. Let's dive a bit deeper into a few of these reasons, and I'll then talk about what you can do to help yourself feel better, get better quality rest, and start to feel like you have a bit more energy. Let's start with news fatigue. During lockdown, we've probably been hitting the news refresh button a bit more often than we normally would, and that might also be why you're feeling a bit more worn out than you would normally be feeling. Overall, the indications are that news consumption has been much higher during this time. More than 2/3 of Australians say that their news consumption has increased since the COVID-19 outbreak, and 70% say that they've been accessing news about it more than once a day. And it is concern about COVID-19 that's driving this increase in news consumption. 78% of those who say they're worried about it have started watching, reading, and listening to news more often. But if you normally avoid the news, you might also be doing that a bit more often than you usually do too. More than 2/3 of Australians say that they're now avoiding news about the coronavirus, and this is largely driven by news fatigue. About half say that they're tired of hearing about COVID-19, and 46% say that they find the news coverage just overwhelming. Now, women are more likely to avoid the news about the coronavirus than men because they find it upsetting, whereas men are more likely to avoid it because they simply feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of news. So while news about the coronavirus has provided people with an important shared topic of conversation, I mean, what else is there? It's also made people feel more anxious. And that younger people, Gen Y in particular, have found the news coverage more anxiety inducing than older people. Now this seems a little bit odd given that older people are more likely to suffer serious health effects. However, job losses, isolation from friends, school closures, and uncertainty about the future impacts on younger people perhaps more. So there's a real push and pull dynamic going on with news right now. Anxiety driving people to check news more often, as well as pulling people towards avoiding further news information. It's tiring to try to manage this dynamic all the time. My recommendation is to try to check the news maybe twice a day, or even once if you're okay with that. That way you won't miss any important announcements or updates, but you also help to manage any anxiety and overwhelm that you might be experiencing too. Next, let's talk about feeling groggy. Now, part of this may be due to what's known as sleep inertia. This is when sleepiness is still kind of hanging around in your brain. You just can't wake up, switch on, and then accelerate to 100 kilometers per hour. Your brain needs a bit of time to warm up. Now, part of this grogginess might be sleep hygiene issues, getting enough sleep or enough good quality sleep at least, but it doesn't perhaps explain why more people are starting to feel like this and continuing to do so as the lockdown goes on in some shape or form. One of the reasons might be that we aren't getting enough of one of the main biological signals to alertness, and that's exposure to outdoor light, especially morning light. Lack of exposure to that makes people feel less alert throughout the whole day. Anxiety doesn't help either. Even if we're just experiencing low-grade background levels of anxiety rather than acute bouts, it's likely to be affecting the duration and quality of your sleep. And this can add up over a period of time. Your sleep may well have been affected for a while, and it's only in recent days or weeks that you've actually started to feel it. Though it's likely that your cognitive performance, how quickly you're able to solve problems and be mentally agile, has been affected for a while, but you just haven't noticed it. So what can you do? Try to get that morning exposure to light, even if it's just trying to do tasks near windows where you can. Try to maintain a good sleep-wake routine, even if you don't have to be going anywhere for work right now. Try not to nap if you can, because this can break down your rhythm of regular bedtimes and waking times. But also understand that if you're a morning person or a night person, these are called chronotypes, it's probably best not to work against the grain of that natural setting for long periods of time if you can avoid it. Oh, and also try not to do your infrequent news check-in just before bedtime. Give yourself a good buffer of at least a couple of hours before you want to be calm and get to sleep. Next, let's talk about video calls. The problem here is hour after hour of calls we're making because that's how we're doing meetings now, and also trying to stay in contact socially. Or maybe it's managing your child's online learning environments too. If you're not careful, you could be on video calls for most of the waking hours in your day. And maybe it's the volume of calls that you're doing just through this one medium that's contributing to your exhaustion. As humans, many of us crave variety, but now all sorts of aspects of lives are coming together in this just one place: video calls. Check out my video on 5 tips for managing video calls in lockdown for more information. You can find the link in the description for this video and in the pinned comment below. Okay, next, let's talk about how physical distancing seems to be loosening up around the world, whether we like it or not. And it seems to be at around the 1 month mark. The data shows that quarantine fatigue is real. Researchers at the University of Maryland in the USA studied cell phone location data and found that starting on April the 14th, people around the country began going out more frequently and traveling longer distances from home after they passed that 1 month mark. So why is this loosening happening? One simple explanation that's been used by economists is called diminishing marginal utility. During the first few days in lockdown, you probably had the opportunity to do things in the house that you were pretty enthusiastic about. Maybe you binge watched Tiger King, or perhaps you finally got round to building that blanket fort with your kids. But that was now several weeks ago. Now your kids are driving you nuts, let alone actually trying to direct their learning at home, and you're into the dregs of Netflix shows and you just want it to stop. In other words, you've used up all the high utility or high happiness activities and you're now scraping the bottom of the barrel. Cue staying at home fatigue and the creeping desire to get out. Many of us also appear to be driven by what is called idleness aversion. Now, this may be a conditioned thing that we've grown to expect in life, but briefly, it's our desire to get out of the house and do something. Whether it's a visit with friends or a trip to the burger place, that's more of a craving than a necessity. Now, research shows that we don't actually like sitting around and doing nothing for extended periods of time all that much at all. One study found that when subjects were told to sit in a room and do nothing, they chose to give themselves electric shocks rather than pass the time in silence. That's how much we hate it. So yes, the fatigue and even agitation you're feeling is real. It's normal. Do what you can with the tips I've talked about to create the conditions to create a bit more energy. And if you do need to go out, then do it safely. Remember, the biological nature of the virus is essentially not changing. Time and time again, it's proved itself to be highly contagious and brutal in its impact for many of those who contract it. But social conditions are changing. We know more about the virus than we did. Around the world, people are starting to engage with a pathway towards a more normal life while trying to adapt public health measures to protect people while doing this. A careful balance has to be struck, and that balance is going to look different in different places in the world. I know you might be feeling tired, but it's important that we stick to the guidance as much as possible. The more we can do this, the less likely it will be that we get diverted into more restricted phases of lockdown and social restrictions again. Hey, if you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, check out this one on making decisions in lockdown and why it's really tiring, and the other videos in the pinned comment below for other tips. Thanks, and see you again soon. Be safe, be kind, be well.